Hey, this is Pastor Nat from Back to the Bible, and you are joining us on Win the Day. Today, we're going to talk about overcoming our anxiety. When our kids were little, they took swimming lessons at a local college down the street from our home. We would get the kids ready, we'd get them to class, they would meet their teacher, and then we would point up to the window and say, "I know this is a little scary, but just know we'll be right up there. You can look up there and we'll be watching over you. Do not be afraid." Now, the first few times, our boys, they just kept looking up and waving. Now, we would wave back, but they couldn't see us. But just knowing that we were there watching was what they needed for that sustaining peace. Jesus offers us the same peace today. How so? Listen to what Matthew records in Matthew chapter 14, beginning in verse 22. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. After dismissing the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Well into the night, he was there alone. Meanwhile, the boat was already some distance from land, battered by the waves, because the wind was against them. Jesus came toward them walking on the sea very early in the morning. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. Immediately, Jesus spoke to them. "Have courage, it is I, do not be afraid." I have no doubt this is a familiar story to you. But there is no doubt that God calls us to a life of following Him, even into the stormy waters. Now, I don't know what storm you're facing today. Maybe the storm of sickness and health concerns. Maybe it's the storm of relational problems or infidelity or divorce. Maybe you're in a storm of financial crisis. Maybe your storm is loneliness and abandonment. We all face storms in this life. They are to be expected. But verse 23 tells us that Jesus made the disciples get into the boat knowing the storm was coming. But Jesus, He may have been away from them on the mountain, but know this. Just because the disciples couldn't see Jesus didn't mean that He couldn't see them. That is true for us today. Even when we can't see Him, He still sees us. So many times we feel like God is far away. We feel afraid. So we seek peace, but we still feel the fear. Where is God in those moments? Where is the love of Christ in the midst of the storm? Now, it's important that we don't miss what Matthew wrote in verse 22. Matthew says Jesus made the disciples get into the boat to go ahead of Him. In other words, Jesus promised to meet them. Our storms remind us of the faithfulness of God. And though the storm came, Jesus watched them, and He came to them as He promised. Friend, He's going to do the same for you. So here's my challenge for you today. Remember, Jesus is there. He is watching out for you. Now you are called to wait for His faithfulness. The storm you are facing is not a surprise to God. Yes, it is to you. Yes, you don't like it. The disciples didn't like it. But God was always there. Jesus is there for you today. Jesus cares for you. He is watching over you. The same power that rose Jesus from the dead is the same power He will use to carry you through the storm. So today, remember Jesus' presence and wait for his faithfulness. It is guaranteed. When we find our peace in Christ, that is the sure way to win the day.